The Oregon sea weeps as I carve the Christmas turkey. My heart glows with hope that Lucas, my son, will fill the silent house with warmth. But his words, sharp as frost, tear through the candlelight. I wish mother had never been born. The air freezes. My soul shatters like waves. Anna, my daughter-in-law, her silence a second blade. Victoria's shadow looms her claws on the land, my life. This is the moment the battle begins. Before we dive deep into this dramatic story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming tales. And leave a comment to let us know where you're watching from. The Oregon coast wailed its winds clawing at my modest home, the sea's breath a restless hymn through the pines. I stood in my kitchen, the scent of roast turkey curling around me like a memory of warmer days. Christmas Eve was my sanctuary, the one night each year when my son Lucas, 36, and his wife Anna, 38, filled my quiet world with laughter. I was Clara Whitmore, 52, a retired bookkeeper who'd woven 30 years of numbers into a life for my children, Lucas and Sophie, 44 after my husband's death, a decade ago. My days were simple, predictable, a rhythm I'd come to cherish, but tonight the air held a shadow, a tension sharp as the frost on my windows. I brushed it aside, arranging dessert's pecan pie, my mother's recipe, humming carols to drown the unease. Lucas and Anna arrived early, their coats dusted with snow, their smiles polite but thin. I hugged them, my heart a drum of hope, yet Lucas's eyes, once my beacon, were distant. Anna's chatter felt forced, a veneer over something unspoken. The ocean growled, my mother's voice in its depths. The tide sees all, Clara. Trust its warning. Dinner began, as it always had, the table aglow with candles, the clink of glasses, a fragile song. Lucas sat at the head, Anna beside him, her fingers restless on her wine glass. I served the meal, turkey, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, my hands steady, despite the ache in my chest. We spoke of small things, Lucas's tech job, Anna's gardening, the holidays' fleeting magic. But the words were hollow like shells washed ashore. I smiled, masking the chill creeping through me. Lucas's glances were fleeting, Anna's laughter too sharp. As we lingered over pie, the conversation slowed, the fire's crackle louder than our voices. Then Lucas gazed at me, his eyes filled with ice, and uttered, his voice piercing, "I wish you'd never been born." The words were a storm, tearing through the warmth, the room's air sucked dry. My fork clattered to the plate. My breath, a jagged shard. Anna's gaze dropped, her knuckles white around her glass, and Lucas's face was stone, as if his cruelty weighed nothing. The ocean roared, "Truth cuts, Clara. Feel its edge." My husband's death had left me raw, but Lucas was my anchor, my reason. Now he'd cast me adrift, his words a declaration that my love, my life, was worthless. I sat frozen, the words burning a wound deeper than any I'd known. I'd poured my soul into Lucas for 36 years, nights balancing books to pay for his college weekends, cheering his soccer games, and tears shed when he left for the city. I said in a ghostly, trembling voice, "Just being honest." Anna's silence was a second betrayal. Her eyes were fixed on her plate, as if my pain was invisible. The dinner was blurred, and my heart was a hollow drum. I served coffee and smiled at their small talk. But I was somewhere else, caught in the echo of Lucas's voice. The years of sacrifice, working overtime, skipping vacations, and defending him to Sophie when she called him selfish, crumbled to ash. The tide hissed as I realized they had hidden their hearts, Clara. Seek the truth. The evening dragged on, a charade I couldn't get out of. Lucas scrolled through his phone. Anna whispered about the weather, their normalcy, a mockery, and I excused myself, my voice brittle, saying, "I'm tired. I'll rest early." Lucas barely looked up, a distracted wave, and Anna's "good night" was too bright. I fled to my bedroom, locking the door. The silence of the house a suffocating fog, and I sank onto the bed, my hands shaking, the words, replaying, "I wish you'd never been born." Every syllable was a knife slicing away the mother I'd been, and I'd worked tirelessly, given everything, my dreams of travel, my savings, my youth for Lucas's future, but his cruelty was intentional, a truth he'd harbored unspoken until now. Was it anger? Had I somehow let him down? My only response was the ocean's chant. You are more than their scorn, Clara. Rise. Sleep was a stranger my mind, a storm of questions. But by dawn, a cold clarity settled, and Lucas's words weren't a fleeting outburst, but a revelation of years of neglect. His visits had become infrequent, his calls short, his gratitude absent, and I'd been his safety net, a mother to call when he needed money or comfort, but never valued. I got up the house silent, the Christmas lights mocking, and as I brewed coffee, my hands moved mechanically, the numbness a shield. Lucas and Anna left that afternoon, their farewell brief with no mention of the previous night, and I watched their car disappear, my heart a stone. Then I took my will out of the safe, its pages heavy with promises I'd made, Lucas's name there, heir to my house, my savings, and my life's work. With a steady hand, I scratched it out, the pen's ink, a vow. My wealth would go to charity, local shelters, libraries, and causes that honored kindness, not cruelty. The ocean whispered, You are not their shadow, Clara. Claim your light. Lucas called 2 days later. His name on my phone was a spark in the darkness, and I stared at the screen, my pulse a drum, but I didn't answer. His voicemail was hesitant. Mom, we need to talk, with no regret or apology, just a demand which I deleted with iron resolve. The betrayal wasn't just his words. It was the years he'd taken me for granted, and I was done being his anchor, done pouring love into a void. That evening, the doorbell rang sharply in the silence, and I was expecting Lucas, but instead, a stranger, a tall woman in a black suit, her eyes as cold as the sea. My breath seized when she replied, I'm here for Victoria Langston, in a seductive voice. We need to discuss your will. Sophie's friend Victoria was a slick realtor with a shark smile. How did she know the woman held a folder? Its contents, a shadow of control, and I knew this was not a routine visit, but rather the start of a war as the water roared and they circled. Clara, guard your heart. Against rocky cliffs, the Oregon Sea roars its waves, a never-ending symphony froth, like a veil hiding profound secrets. Lucas said, I wish I'd never been born. 2 days have gone by since that Christmas night, when my son and his wife Anna left my house without turning around, their silence louder than any storm. I stand in the kitchen with my coffee cold and the gray light of dawn spilling through the window. I am now a woman emerging, my spirit, burning for truth, rather than the mother who sewed her aspirations into Lucas's destiny. The stranger's visit, Victoria Langston's servant, her dossier, a shadow of power haunts me. Sophie's buddy, Victoria 42, is aware of my will change. How in the depths my mother's voice echoes the rumble of the ocean. The tide reveals Clara. Look for its current. The coastal wind howled as I handed the document to my lawyer, Helen Marsh, whose office was a sanctuary of cedar and ink. I began with the will, viewing its inked-out lines as my first act of rebellion. Lucas is disinherited, I said, my voice steady despite the pain. My estate goes to charity shelters, libraries, students. Helen's gull-sharp eyes studied me. This is bold, Clara. Why now? I described Christmas, Lucas's brutality, Anna's silence, and the stranger's visit. Helen leaned forward and said, Victoria Langston is pursuing my assets. She sent someone. They know too much. Victoria is a realtor, but her dealings are murky. I've heard rumors of her pressuring widows. We'll lock your will and notarize it today. But dig deeper, Clara. She's not alone. Her words were a tide drawing me toward a reality I hadn't previously encountered. The ocean whispered, Your shield is forged, Clara. Wield it. I went back home and rummaged through memories, each of which was a clue to their betrayal. Lucas's distance had grown over the years, brief visits, abrupt calls, and his gratitude as a ghost. I had ignored this, blaming Anna's ambition and his tech job's demands, but now I saw the pattern. Sophie, my 44-year-old daughter, had warned me that Lucas only calls when he needs something, and I had defended him blind to his selfishness. Now Victoria Langston's involvement hinted at more, so I opened my laptop, the glow on the screen, a beacon. I looked up Victoria Langston's real estate firm, Tidewater Properties, which was connected to Lucas's company Coastal Tech. A joint venture articles boasted combining tech and real estate for coastal developments. My savings, $300,000 meant for Lucas's future, had seeded his startup. Had he sold me out? Their avarice is a stream, Clara. Follow it like the tide roared. My ex-husband's brother, Samuel, 58, was a quiet man who had supported me during the divorce. We met at a cafe on a cliff, the sea salt stinging in the air, and his eyes, warm as driftwood, softened at my suffering. Clara, what's happened? He asked, and I told him everything. Lucas's words, the will, Victoria's stranger, the Coastal Tech link. They're after my money, Samuel. Maybe more. He scowled. Victoria is ruthless. I've seen her kind. She courted my firm for investments, but her numbers didn't add up. I'll dig into Coastal Tech and Lucas's role, but be careful, Clara. They're watching. His warning was a shadow, but his loyalty was a spark. I gave him Lucas's business card, my hands shaking, and said, "Find out what he's hiding." The ocean sang, "Kin rises, Clara. So do you." The stranger's folder, which had been left on my doorway after her visit, gnawed at me that night. I opened it with gasping air and found documents inside, including the draft of my will, bank statements, and even the tax records for my photography business. How had they obtained these A-type notes said, "Join us, Clara, and secure your future"? Victoria's signature was a claw. I called Helen and said, "They have my private files." Panicking, she remained calm and said, "File a police report, change your locks, I will hire a forensic accountant, and we will trace the breach." Her voice was my anchor, but I was terrified. Lucas kept calling, "Mom, we need to talk," but I ignored them, his voice a lie. Anna's silence. Sophie's absence, they'd all chosen sides. The tide hissed, their net tightens. Clara break free. My son, my light, had tied my savings to her plans, so I was devastated when Samuel called the following day, in a low voice, and said, "Coastal Tech is in debt, Clara. Victoria is funneling money to offshore accounts. Lucas signed the contracts. He's in deep." "Why me?" I said. Samuel paused. "Your estate, your land, it's prime for their developments. They need you compliant or gone." The words were a wave crashing. I owned 2 acres, a gift from my mother, worth millions to developers. Victoria's stranger wasn't just after my will, but my legacy. I hung up. The house was too quiet. Its walls felt heavy with betrayal, and the ocean seemed to vow, "You are the shore, Clara. Stand firm." I was not their prey. I had locked my will, changed my hair, and alerted the police. However, Victoria's reach seemed limitless, her stranger's eyes a promise of return. I thought of my mother's land, its pines whispering my name. I'd never sell, never yield. Lucas's voice haunted me. "I wish you'd never been born," but I was alive, fierce. My fight was just beginning. The ocean roared, "You are the tide, Clara. Rise and claim your stars." At dusk, the Oregon coast roars, its waves crashing against the rocks, like a battle song spraying like a curtain of stars. I wish you'd never been born. A week has changed me since that Christmas night, when my son and Anna left my house, their silence a wound. I stand on the porch, the wind as sharp as truth, my heart thumping with Lucas's betrayal. Rather than being the mother who illuminated Lucas's darkness, I now embody a rising wave with a soul that yearns for justice. My worry was fueled by Victoria Langston, a foreigner, who showed they were after my lifeland and will. Samuel's warning, which highlighted Coastech's debts, and Lucas's contract, exposed their greed. Their prize is 2 acres and my $300,000. My mother's voice echoes in the abyss as the ocean roars. The wave cuts deep, Clara. Make your blade sharp. In the morning, Samuel called me in a low tide, saying, "Clara, I've found more. Victoria's Tidewater Properties is a front. She's laundering money through Coastal Tech. Lucas is her pawn." I gasped, realizing that my son, the rock of my heart, had betrayed me. "How deep?" Samuel sighed and said. "Deep enough to ruin him. They're targeting your land for a resort. Your refusal threatens their investors. They're desperate." Samuel's words echoed like a crashing wave. "A car has been tailing me. Be ready." Fear coiled, but resolve burned brighter. I thanked him, my voice steel. "Keep digging," the ocean whispered as Clara's net frayed. "Strike true." The smell of cedar grounded me as I met Helen Marsh at her office. "Samuel's found fraud," I said, passing him the Coastal Tech articles. "Victoria's after my land," Lucas signed off. Helen's eyes narrowed. "This is criminal, Clara. We'll file a restraining order against Victoria. Alert the feds. Your will is secure, but your land remains at risk. Please consider transferring it to a trust." Her plan was a shield. I nodded. "Do it and trace how they got my files." She called her forensic accountant. "We'll find the leak, Lucas or Sophie. Someone close." The betrayal hurt. Sophie, 44. My daughter had been silent since Christmas. Was she complicit? Keep your heart safe, Clara. Kin may wound. The tide hissed. When Sophie unexpectedly showed up that afternoon, her knock was as sharp as the wind. Her eyes, which had been my mirror, were clouded, and she was holding a big package. "Mom, we need to talk." She began, her voice honeyed and too smooth, and I allowed her in, turning my kitchen into a battleground. "What's this?" Sophie asked, referring to the envelope from Victoria that contained an offer. "Join her circle, secure your future," she said, echoing the stranger's statement, which was a trap disguised as redemption. "Why you, Sophie?" I said, glancing at the envelope. She slid it over the table. "She's helping us, Mom. Lucas's business is failing. We need you to sign for family." I pressed, my voice icy. "Family?" she asked furiously. "Lucas wishing me away when he broke me. Where were you?" The ocean snarled. "Her words are bait, Clara. See the who." Sophie's eyes fell. "I didn't expect him to say that, but Victoria's offer is genuine. If you choose to fight, you'll lose everything." With steady hands, I ripped open the envelope, which contained contracts, the deed to my land, a transfer to Tidewater Properties, and an offer of $500,000, a small portion of its value, as well as a consulting role and a lease. "This is theft," I said, my voice piercing. "You're selling my legacy." Sophie's eyes flashed. "You're selfish, Mom, hoarding land while Lucas drowns Victoria's powerful. You can't win." Her venom startled my daughter, my pride, and now Victoria's voice. "Did Lucas tell you to do this?" They had ensnared my children in their snare, prompting me to rise and declare, "Leave, Sophie. I'm tired of being your tool." She flinched and said, "He is desperate, and so are we. Sign the document, or they will take it regardless." She left with the envelope undamaged, and her footsteps a fading storm, the tide vowing, "You are the rock, Clara." Unyielding. That night, a car lingered outside with its headlights slicing the darkness. I looked through the blinds, my pulse a drum, and Victoria's associates. As Samuel had warned, I called the police and reported a prowler. The car disappeared, but the fear persisted. Helen's accountant called and said, "The leak is from Coastal Tech. Lucas accessed your accounts and shared them with Victoria. My son, who had betrayed me, had given my life to her." I shed my first tears since Christmas, not for Lucas, but for the mother I'd been. My pain hardened into purpose. I walked the beach, the sand cold, the waves chanting Sophie's betrayal. Lucas's greed, they believed me weak, but I was forging a blade sharp as the sea. The ocean sang, "Your stars burn, Clara. Claim them. Victoria's investors are offshore, Clara. They're dangerous, They want your land by month's end, or worse. Samuel said, his face etched with dread when he greeted me in the morning. Worse, I gasped. His hand touched mine, a spark of kin. I nodded, my resolve a tide. Victoria's net was vast, but I was no prey. The ocean roared, "You are the storm, Clara. They've silenced others. You need protection." Fear clawed, but I saw my mother's pines, their whispers my strength. "I won't sign," I said. "Help me fight." Samuel's eyes held pride. "I've got to contact a private investigator. We'll expose them, but stay sharp. They're closing in." Samuel's eyes were full of pride. Rachel Vance. Samuel's investigator met me at a seaside diner. Her eyes gleamed sharply, and her folder brimmed with evidence. She said in a low voice, "Victoria is laundering millions through coastal tech, but Anna is the architect, Victoria's silent partner, funneling your savings to offshore accounts." My heart sank. Anna, my daughter-in-law, whose silence at Christmas had pierced deeply, was the shadow behind the scheme. "Proof?" I asked sharply, and Rachel slid pictures across the table. Anna meeting Victoria at Tidewater Properties bank documents connecting her to the transfers. Rachel said, "She's been skimming your accounts for years, and if you don't sign, they'll force a sale." Anger erupted, and Anna's courteous smiles and gardening stories were all a mask. The tide hissed, and their deceit was like a current, Clara. "Please address it," Helen Marsh called in a steady voice. "The restraining order is in effect. The trust for your land is filed. Clara and Victoria cannot touch it. The feds are investigating coastal tech, but watch Anna. She's desperate." I thanked her, my resolve iron, but facing Victoria was my war. I drove to Tidewater Properties, its glass walls gleaming like a predator's teeth. The coastal night was sharp, the sea's chant. My pulse, and Victoria's receptionist anticipating me, waved me to the elevator. The silence on the top floor was a trap, and Victoria sat behind her desk, her smile a shark's. "No senses, Victoria, just truth. Your fraud is exposed, Anna's role, Lucas's contracts, the feds are coming," she said, her smile faltering, a crack in her facade, the ocean growling her net phrase. "Clara, strike." Victoria leaned forward, her voice venomous, saying, "You're out of your depth, Clara. Please consider transferring the land and joining us, or you may risk losing everything." I threw Rachel's pictures on her desk, and she said, "Anna's your partner. Stealing my savings. You thought I'd break, you're wrong." Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "Anna's a tool. Like Lucas, you're the prize. Your land's worth millions. Refuse, and you'll regret it." Her threat was a wave, but I was the shore, and I said, "I've protected my land. The trust is ironclad. The police know you're prowlers. You're finished." She stood, her heels clicking, and said, "You're naive, Clara. My investors don't lose. They'll bury you." Fear flickered, but my mother's pines whispered strength, so I turned to go. "Try Victoria. I'm not alone," she said sharply. I didn't answer, but doubt began to creep in. Was Lucas stuck like me? Lucas called home, his voice shaking as he said, "Mom, I'm sorry I was wrong. Let's fix this, please." His plea was a hook baited with regret. "Mom, I didn't mean it," he said. "Victoria's controlling everything. I signed to save the company. Let me make it right." His hands shook a liar's tell, and his voice was my son's. "You gave her my accounts." I said, my voice cold. "Anna's your partner. You sold me out." He said, his eyes hollow. I drove to his office, where Coastal Tech's sign had faded, a ghost of his ambition. He halted, startled, and said, "It's not what you think." I moved closer, saying, "I trusted you, Lucas. You wished me gone. Now you're hers." I couldn't tell if the tears were mine or his, and I left the sound of the water chanting, overpowering his words. "He's lost Clara. Save yourself." At midnight, Rachel called with an urgent voice saying, "Anna's fled Clara. She's with Victoria's investors. They're planning a lawsuit claiming your land's theirs. Fraudulent deeds. Samuel's safe, but they're targeting you." My breath caught in my throat. Anna's betrayal was sharper than Lucas's. She had woven the web. Her silence at Christmas was a strategy. The house was a fortress, but fear gnawed. Samuel arrived his presence a harbor. He said, "We're close, Clara. Rachel's tracking their accounts. We'll expose them, but you need to stay hidden. They're dangerous." "You're stronger than them," he said as his hand steadied mine. I nodded, feeling my heart beat like a drum. Anna's role was the final crack that led to my family's complete ruin, while the ocean sang, "You are the tide, Clara unbreakable." I was Clara forged in pain and sharpened by truth, and the confrontation wasn't over, but I was ready. The ocean roared, "You are the storm's heart, Clara. Let them fall." I walked the beach at dawn, the sand cold, the waves a vow, Victoria's empire looming her investors a shadow. But I was no shadow. Rachel's evidence, Helen's trust, and Samuel's loyalty were my arrows. Lucas's plea echoed as a temptation to falter, but Anna's betrayal burned brighter. She'd played me her kindness a lie, Sophie's ultimatum, Lucas's cruelty. All of them were Victoria's puppets. The Oregon sea sung its waves a hymn of victory, curling over the cliffs, their light a weave of stars reborn in the embrace of dawn. I stood on my shore, the wind a gentle chant, my heart a drum no longer bruised by Lucas's curse. I wish you'd never been born. 3 months had carved me anew since that Christmas Eve, since my son, 36, and Anna, 38, broke my trust. I was Clara Whitmore, 52, and now a tide had risen my soul, a beacon of reclaimed truth. Victoria Langston's 42 empire, her deception. Sophie's treachery and Anna's schemes had almost drowned my $300,000 savings, my 2 acres, and my spirit. However, I'd fought with Rachel's proof, Samuel's loyalty, and Helen's shield, and now I'd burn their lies to dust. The ocean roared my mother's voice in its depths. "The tide renews, Clara. You are its dawn. We've got them, Clara. Victoria's accounts are exposed. Offshore transfers forged deeds, all traced to Tidewater properties. The FBI's raiding today." Rachel called me in the morning, her voice as keen as a gull's screech. My breath seized relief, smashing Lucas. "Anna," I said, and she paused, then said, "Lucas is testifying. Anna is arrested. She was the key skimming your savings for years. Your land's safe, and the trust holds." Joy erupted, and Rachel added, "Victoria's investors are fleeing. Samuel's safe." "You did this, Clara." Her words were like embers warming my scars, and I thanked her, vowing to end their reign. "End their shadows, Clara, and claim your light." "The feds have Victoria in custody," Helen said, the cedar air calming my heart. "Fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, her empire's done. Your restraining order, held your will, is untouchable. Coastal Tech's seized Lucas's assets, frozen." I exhaled, the weight of months lifting, and asked, "What of him?" Helen's eyes softened as I said, "He's cooperating, but he's broken. Anna's charges, likely from prison, have shattered him. Sophie's silent hiding." The victory was bittersweet. My children, the anchors of my heart, had chosen greed, but I was free. My land, my $500,000, and my legacy were all mine. "I'm restarting my photography," I told her. "A studio, my truth." Helen smiled. "You're a force, Clara," murmured the ocean to Clara. "Grow fierce." Samuel took me to the raid, where the glass walls of Tidewater were crowded with agents. Victoria's office was deserted, and her shark smile had vanished. We stood by the sea, his presence a harbor, and he said, "You broke them." His eyes warm. "Your mother's pride lives in you." I shared my plans with him to open a studio in town that would capture the soul of the coast. I felt invisible. I said, dimming myself for Lucas, Sophie, and Anna, "Never again." He nodded and replied, "You're her legacy, Clara, not them." His words were a wave that lifted me up, and we walked the shore, the cool sand, and the waves a chant. Samuel's investigator had been my spear, and his loyalty my shield. "Stay close," I said, his hand brushing mine, a spark of kin. The ocean vowed, "You are enough, Clara. Always were." I let Lucas in my kitchen, a silent battleground, and he said, "You wished me gone?" in a steady voice. "You gave her my life. Why should I trust you?" Lucas arrived at dusk without warning, his knock soft, his face gaunt. "Mom," he said, his voice raw. "I'm sorry I was lost. Victoria's lies, Anna's plans I didn't see." "I was weak," he said. "Anna pushed Victoria promised salvation, and I failed you." His pain was genuine, but so was mine. "You broke something sacred," I said, "but I can't be your mother. You're not her pawn anymore." He nodded. "I'll testify. I'll pay. Can we try?" He departed a delicate thread, started the tide, whispered, "Healing is gradual, Clara. Let it rise." I halted the rhythm of the sea, my guide. "Maybe on my terms," I said. I listened with my heart a frozen lake as Sophie cried in a shaky voice, "Mom, I was wrong. Victoria used me. I didn't see." "You chose her, Sophie." I screamed. "You sold my land. Where were you when I was suffering?" She cried and said, "I was afraid Lucas was drowning, and I thought it was family." Her remorse was a spark, not enough to heal, but a beginning. "Prove it." I said, "Live your truth, not hers." She vowed to try, and I hung up the house quiet, their betrayal scarred, but not my chain. My photography studio served as my forge, and its walls would soon house my artwork: the sea's rage, the cliff's grace, the ocean's fire. You are the dawn, Clara whole. I stood on my land at dusk, the pines whispering my mother's song, Victoria's empire in ruins, Anna imprisoned, Lucas humbled, Sophie seeking atonement, and their greed had almost stolen my 2 acres, my savings, and my name. However, I had risen, strengthened by Rachel's proof, photos records, Helen's trust, Samuel's kin, and I regretted nothing, not the raid, the confrontation, the rift, only their choices, the fissures they'd made. Justice wasn't retribution, but reclamation. My studio opened. Its first exhibit, Tide's Truth, drew crowds. Lucas came, his eyes softened. "You're radiant, Mom." I nodded. I was invisible. Never again. Sophie sent a letter a step toward reconciliation. The tide roared. "You are the star, Clara, unshattered." I told Samuel that love was a door that was open, not a cage. He ate with me, and the sea's chant was our music. He said, "You're free," and I smiled. I always was. I just forgot. My heart, which had once belonged to Lucas and Sophie, was now mine, fierce and full. The studio flourished. My art was displayed in galleries, and my name, Clara Whitmore, was a beacon. Anna's trial loomed, and her silence was no longer a burden. I walked the shore, and the waves were a hymn. A year ago, I had been broken by Lucas's words, Sophie's bargain, Victoria's claws, and a tide that almost drowned me. But I had claimed my stars, my land, and my truth. And I was Clara. And like the sea, I was unwavering, radiant, and whole.